Welcome to 2016. This is my first sermon of the year. And this year I've decided that throughout the year I want to focus on a few things over and over. Not the same sermon over and over, but the same themes, as opposed to sort of whatever strikes my fancy in a particular month. I'm going to be focusing particularly, not to say I'll never deviate from this, on Unitarian Universalist history, Unitarian Universalist purpose, or if you like the word theology or philosophy, why we exist, and what we need to be for the future. I'm also going to be focusing on criticisms, critiques, and suggestions that make us as a religion, and I use the term religion deliberately, to make us stronger, more meaningful, and more relevant, both in our community, in our society, in our country, and in each one of our lives. And we're going to start by looking at our identity as a liberal religion. Now, liberal religion is a term you don't hear a whole lot today, but it wasn't so long ago that it was used a great deal, and it had significance and meaning. And we're going to look at that and also try to understand the differences between liberal religion and liberal politics, because oftentimes those two have now become conflated. And if you don't know what conflated means, you're in good company, because I didn't know till a couple of years ago myself. But that means merged together into something that's impossible to pull them apart, essentially, that they've just become one. And this idea that liberal religion and liberal politics is the same thing is particularly common in Unitarian Universalism. And it really shouldn't be. Not to say that there isn't a great deal of overlap. There can be. But the two things are very distinct, and we're going to look at that. Now, as this year goes along, I want everyone to understand one thing, and I'll emphasize this point again and again and again. If I say something that is critical of Unitarian Universalism, it is not because I dislike Unitarian Universalism. It's not that I'm disgruntled. On the contrary, it's because I love it. It was about 8.5 years ago that Jancy and I first stepped into this church, after having decided we would never go to a church again, because no church would ever accept us as we were. And when we worked up the courage to come here, and I said, I can't sign a creed that says I have to believe this or that. I'm not going to say I believe in God. If you require that, I can never be a member here. And I was told it doesn't matter. Some people do, some people don't. You are free. You are free to seek for yourself and make that determination yourself. When we realized that there was a home for us with our views and philosophies that were evolving and changing, I was excited beyond words, as was Jancy. We missed the community of a congregation, but we just couldn't buy into the mind control, if you will. And so, because we found a home here, and because Unitarian Universalism allows you to be you, it doesn't try to mold you into something and force you to say things you don't believe, this is one of the most important movements, in my humble opinion, that exists in the realm of religion today. So anytime I critique or criticize, it's only done in the desire to make it better and out of love for something that has had such an impact on our lives. So never take anything I say as being disgruntled, and I don't think you'll see anything today. But there are things that we can do better, I believe, and we're going to talk about those in the coming year. And I don't mean just us as a congregation, but as a Unitarian Universalist association. So I want to come back to this idea of liberal religion and first look at those two words. A lot of people don't like the word religion. A lot of people in our congregation have come out of churches that were oppressive, and they have escaped, and they are still recovering from that fundamentalist mindset. And Jancy and I certainly fit that category. I don't know how long that ever takes, that is finally totally gone and out of your rearview mirror. It's getting smaller. But if you've lived that life, you know what it is to try to get out of it and then put that aside. And so religion is often tied to that. And so, especially for humanists, atheists, and agnostics, especially those who are new to that because they've escaped something else, they hate the word religion. In fact, there's a phrase nowadays that you hear often, I'm spiritual but not religious. And a lot of people identify that way. Religion is admittedly a human creation. And that's one of the problems. When we start saying religion is handed down by God, we miss the point. Religion is a human construction, a human organization, a human power structure, if you will, a human way of coming together and dealing with themes and ideas of spirituality or the ultimate. And so people get into religious organizations which are human creations, and they have the human fallibilities. And so you see corruption and hypocrisy, power struggles and pettiness, and you often find that they're trying to make you believe something you don't want to believe. And so people say, religion is not for me, religion is stupid, religion is evil, we shouldn't use that word, we need to be something else, we can't call ourselves a religion and be humane and decent and have free thought and welcome people who don't necessarily believe in God, so we can't call ourselves a religion. And I know I've wrestled with that word. Unitarian Universalists wrestle with it. And you rarely hear anyone call us a religion. We're called an association of congregations, we're called a movement, we're called a denomination. Rarely does someone call us a religion. And for all those reasons I've just listed, fair enough, I understand the problem with it. But Unitarian Universalism, warts and all, with all our problems, because we do have them, because we are human too, it functions as a religion. Its members seek to find truth and meaning in their lives, and that, as far as I'm concerned, qualifies us to be a religion. We're a very radical religion, a heretical religion, but nonetheless, a religion that embraces people who don't normally believe what we think of as religious things. Now for the word liberal. I looked it up on my computer as I was working on the sermon, typed in liberal definition, and here's the first one that pops up. And ask yourself if this applies to you and to us. Open to new behavior or opinions and willing to discard traditional values. Bingo! That sounds like us. Open to new behavior or opinions and willing, not desirous, not requiring us to discard traditional values, but willing to do so if they no longer fit, if they no longer make sense. So that's liberal. And now you've got this idea of combining these two words, a liberal religion. A religion that is open to new behavior and opinions and willing to discard traditional values. That certainly defines the Unitarians and the Universalists in their forming days. But if you doubt what I'm saying, here's some book titles. These are books that I was able to just pull off of my shelf at home. So there's probably tons more out there that I don't have. But listen to these titles. The Liberal Gospel, as set forth in the writings of William Ellery Channing. Or Three Prophets of Religious Liberalism, Channing, Emerson, and Parker. Or Being Liberal in an Illiberal Age, Why I Am a Unitarian Universalist. Or, again, that was written by a UU minister, Jack Mendelson. As far as this one, another UU minister, George N. Marshall, Challenge of a Liberal Faith. The monthly newsletter Quest that's still put out today by the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which is a Unitarian Universalist church for people who can't attend church, people who don't have one nearby, prisoners, people overseas where there's not a congregation nearby. Their newsletter Quest has the subtitle, A Monthly for Religious Liberals. So the phrase religious liberal has been used to describe us since before we were officially even a separate denomination. So we're going to hop back in our Wayback Machine. You youngsters don't know what a Wayback Machine probably is. How many of you recognize that phrase? The Bullwinkle fans do. Okay, it was a time machine, and a dog drove it around apparently. So we're going to get in our time machine, or I could say TARDIS for the Doctor Who fans. We're going to go back and look at William Ellery Channing. He's often called the father of American Unitarianism. He served as a senior minister in Boston from 1803 to 1842. So if you start at 1803, our country has only been a country separate for one generation, essentially, 30 years. Let's look at some of the things he wrote way back at the beginning of our country. And these quotes come from that book I just mentioned, The Liberal Gospel is Set Forth in the Writings of William Ellery Channing, edited by Charles Little. First of all, he writes on the principles of liberalism. And remember, when I talk about liberalism right now, I'm talking about religious liberalism, so don't think about political liberalism. The ultimate reliance of a human being is on his own mind. Not on Scripture, not on prayer, not on God. The ultimate reliance of a human being is on his own mind, or you might say reason. Another one, never do violence to your rational nature. Remember, this guy's a minister at the time in the Congregationalist church. God, having framed the soul for expansion, has placed it in the midst of an unlimited universe to receive fresh impulses and impressions without end. And man, dressed in a little brief authority, would sever it from the sublime connection and would shape it after his own ignorance or narrow views. I particularly like that one. God has given us this entire universe for our personal expansion, and what happens? Man, dressed in a little authority, and you can think of this as your religious authorities, would sever you from that sublime connection to the universe, and would shape you after that person's own ignorance and narrow views. Religious leaders trying to make you conform and separate you from the vast wonders of the universe. According to Channing, these are the ends for which a liberal church is erected. This house, referring to the liberal church, is not reared to perpetuate the superstitions of past ages or the present age. It is not reared to doom the worshiper to continual repetition of his own or other delusions. It is reared, and ask yourself if that's why we're here, it is reared for the progress of truth, reared in the faith that the church is destined to, the truth that the church is destined to, and new security reared in anticipation of a happier, holier age. Now, although Channing was not himself a transcendentalist, this movement was still in its infancy, he helped to make room for them in the Unitarian denomination. And just a tiny bit of history, the Unitarians came out of the Congregationalist church. They eventually split after a while. And the Congregationalist church doesn't exist today. They merged into a new denomination, which you may have heard of, the United Church of Christ, which is a merger of four liberal Protestant denominations. So if you wonder that United Church of Christ and Unitarian Universalists often work together, we actually came out of the denomination that is now in the United Church of Christ. The history is all fascinating if you like that sort of thing. Our history goes back to when we were all one. The Unitarians eventually broke away, but that wasn't the intent originally. In Three Prophets of Religious Liberalism, Channing, Emerson, and Parker by Conrad Wright, Wright states that Channing made it impossible for Unitarians to return to the idea that Christ was the unique channel of God's revelation. Okay, so Channing kept pushing and saying Christ isn't the only channel. He wasn't saying Christ wasn't a channel. He's saying he wasn't the only channel. So other religions, other inputs are also valid. Then the Transcendentalists come along. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Theodore Parker, being Transcendentalists, argued that each individual had a religious impulse or the voice of God within that they could listen to. So we can see that religious liberalism, which was originally liberal Christianity, and these liberals argued that we must use reason to understand the Bible. They rejected such things as literalism, meaning the Bible is literal history, literally the Word of God, They rejected the Trinity. They rejected eternal damnation. They rejected the notion that Christ was a blood sacrifice to atone for the sins of all people. Rather than believing in the hopeless depravity of all people, which is still taught in many churches today, that each one of you are hopelessly depraved, hopelessly sinful, totally unpleasing to God, rather than believe that, they believed that humans were capable of doing good by the power of their own nature. And so, due to the teachings of such people as Channing, and even though he himself did not want to set up any new denomination, he wanted to stay a Congregationalist, in 1825, the American Unitarian Association had been formed, a new denomination, a home for the liberal Unitarians, the liberal Congregationalists at the time, and they created a new denomination, still calling themselves Christian, but now Unitarians, rejecting the Trinity, accepting other revelation besides the Bible. And this newly created bed of liberal religion was the birthplace, or a place where transcendentalists thrived within a congregation. But the term liberal religion isn't just relegated to the early 1800s. In 1947, so we're jumping way ahead now, Frederick May Elliott, president of the American Unitarian Association, the same one that was formed way back by Channing, still exists in 1947, he wanted to establish something. And this could have been our name, by the way. So listen, we could have been the United Liberal Church of America. That's what he wanted to call this new thing that he hoped to create. Instead of Unitarian Universalism, we might have been the ULCA, United Liberal Church of America. He wanted the Unitarians and the Universalists to take the lead in creating this. Now, it never happened, but in 1953, 6 years later, the Council of Liberal Churches was established. So this is an organization that actually existed and used the phrase liberal. The Council of Liberal Churches was established to jointly manage for Unitarians and Universalists religious education, public relations, and their publications. In 1966, now we're into my lifespan, George N. Marshall wrote his book, Challenge of a Liberal Faith. And he writes, "We recognize and enjoy the role of being heretics in a conventional sense, being the mavericks of the religious landscape. This is the challenge of liberal religion, which frees us from old stereotypes so we can develop in freedom a modern religion that is increasingly naturalistic, humanistic, idealistic, and realistic. If you have ever doubted traditional faith, if you have ever wondered about ideas that others do not question, if you have ever felt revulsion at concepts of life and death that are so trite that they become meaningless banalities of the religious life, if you have a tendency to reject the cliches of religious institutions and have been appalled by its sentimentality, if your mind refuses to accept non-scientific teachings, you may be a Unitarian Universalist without knowing it, and on the road to religious liberalism." Those two phrases go together in his book, Unitarian Universalist, Religious Liberal. So for well over 100 years, the phrase liberal religion had significant meaning and had no reference to politics at all. Not to say the people in a liberal religion weren't involved in political movements, because they were. But the phrase had a different meaning. Religious liberalism meant freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, embracing scientific discoveries, rejecting trite religious phrases and teachings, seeking God or ultimate meaning without the approval of religious institutions, rejecting such notions as eternal torment or a wrathful God, accepting Jesus as fully human and not divine, and perhaps most importantly, a growing acceptance of the value of other religious viewpoints, not just Christianity, and the rejection of claims of absolute truth by any religious organization. These definitions are still true today, though you rarely hear the phrase religious liberalism used today. What would keep a political conservative from being religiously liberal? That's the question now. Now we're going to get into the politics a little bit. There is no reason, at least in my mind, that Unitarian Universalism shouldn't have a good split of political conservatives and liberals. There's nothing there that has any bearing on whether you are politically liberal or conservative when I went through those aspects of liberal religion. And yet, if you look around Unitarian Universalism and you were to poll everybody, by far the majority are considered politically liberal or progressive. Why is that? I'm sure there's many reasons. I'm sure it's very complex, but I did find a passage in one of those books I mentioned that might help to highlight this. This is the book Being Liberal in an Illiberal Age, Why I Am a Unitarian Universalist by Jack Mendelson. Listen to this discussion of power in society and how you can start to go from being religiously liberal to perhaps politically liberal. Power, ethically understood, is the ability to achieve moral compass, a crucial dimension of the gift of life and its will to live. In the midst of life that wills to live is the use of power. A liberal and liberating faith, so now we have liberal religion, a liberal and liberating faith in both its personal and communal forms, that's our congregation, must come to terms with the realities of power. Social action is the exercise of power. Ethical social action is the exercise of power for implementing the demands of justice, equity, and love. The idea of power in the exercise of power must never be viewed as alien to the liberal spirit. Power is a basic dimension, a being in a basic dimension of personal and institutional liberal life. It is both desirable and necessary in implementing the demands of love and justice. Now this is one book, one person's writing, but let me paraphrase this. A liberal religion should be comfortable with gaining power, and as part of its emphasis of changing the world and making it a better place, should want to exercise power. It is necessary to implement the demands of love and justice. So now you have this writing, and there are plenty others like this, where a liberal religion, in order to do what a liberal religion should do, must be exercising power, because this is what justice demands, what love demands. And now the two become conflated. Political power is now equated to morality, to the purpose of the church. And I'm not saying I accept this. I'm saying this is how we got to where we are today, perhaps. In our desire to make change for the better, which certainly needs to be done, he's actually gone so far as to say that implementing social change is a demand of love and justice. And so, within Unitarian Universalism, it seems that social change has become a moral imperative, and certain social changes were deemed morally good, or appropriately religiously liberal, and implementing these changes became the right and critical and essential thing to do. The power to make these changes comes through politics. That's where the power is. And the party that was most aligned with the majority view of most Unitarian Universalists has become, it seems, the Democratic Party. And this is not me shilling for the Democrats. I'm not. But I'm saying that's how you get to where you have a congregation that should encompass a wide variety of political views, I think definitely lopsided towards the liberal political parties. Political liberalism has become, in some minds, religious liberalism, because implementing social change became not just a moral issue, but the moral issue, absolutely essential. Now, I think this is a mistake to some degree, because religious liberalism and political liberalism are separate things. They may drive you to be actively involved politically in a liberal cause, that's fine. But to say that our congregation is almost all exclusively one political viewpoint, to me is a mistake, and something that we need to look hard at. That's something that's true, it happens right now, but should it? And that's going to be just for our discussion afterwards. Now I'm going to be talking about this more in coming sermons, but I want to give you a couple of examples. And again, these are my opinions. They're not statements of absolute truth. But we had a discussion recently here about what sort of views would be welcome in our congregation. And what would we allow to be taught from the pulpit or invite a speaker to speak on. And so we had a discussion and talk back about this. And one of the things that came up, a couple examples actually, and I'm going to give you my view, my opinion on a couple of issues, and you can certainly disagree because I'm not the Pope, I haven't come down from God, and I'm not the voice of God or anything like that. But here's how I view things. One of the examples was, there were actually three. The Trinity. What if someone came in and they were a Trinitarian and they believed Jesus was God? Not the Son of God in the sense that you could say we're all children of God, but uniquely divine, literally God. Would someone like that be welcome here, and would we allow them to speak from the pulpit? How about somebody who said, I'm against same-sex marriage. I believe only in marriage between a man and a woman. Would we welcome them here as a member, as a participant? Would we allow them to speak from the pulpit? Finally, what about someone who's opposed to abortion and thinks abortion is murder? Would they feel welcome here? Was there a place for them here? Would we allow them to speak from the pulpit? Now, each of these issues has to be dealt with separately. There's not a blanket statement. And I want to say right now, we are not the church that believes everything and welcomes everyone who believes everything. Anyone can walk in the doors and sit here. And we don't kick people out. But who would we let speak with authority from the pulpit or share an idea we felt that was worth a couple hours of our time? One example of something that would be a total waste of my time and I wouldn't want to come, we're going to invite someone who's a flat earther, and they're going to come in and tell us why they think the earth is flat. Such people exist in this world, truly. Is that worth 2 hours of my time or your time? Is it worth putting it out in the newspaper that we're having a flat earther come and speak? To me, no. That issue's dead. It's not worth wasting time on. You can have a fun intellectual debate on it with someone if you want, but is that the purpose of our congregation, of our Sunday morning? Is that time well spent? And I would say certainly not. And on the extreme end of the scale, we never invite someone in who was a white supremacist, who thought we should reinstitute slavery, or who thought women should not have the vote, or any other archaic notions that we've held in the past. That stuff would be a waste of our time, and open-mindedness doesn't mean no-mindedness. And so there are times where we'd say no. But what about these three issues? These are common issues in our society today. On the Trinity, I'd say, no, we are Unitarians. That's our history. We rejected the Trinity back in the early 1800s, and earlier if you go to the European Unitarians. That issue is a dead issue for us. I don't want to spend another second listening to someone try to convince me that Jesus is uniquely God. There's plenty of churches that do that. You can go there and hear that and speak there. That's fine. It doesn't mean we hate you. It doesn't mean we think you're evil. But that's not what we're doing here. We do have goals and objectives and a way we approach things. So if a Trinitarian wanted to come and sit in our congregation, great. If that's what they want to do, I don't know why they would want to, but certainly welcome. Not going to be speaking from the pulpit. That's just not who we are. How about we make it a little tougher? So we go to the same-sex marriage opponent who wants to come in and say, no, I think we really just need to limit it to a man and a woman. And that's what marriage should be. That's traditional. Now, Doug's opinion, and by the way, I do not pick the speakers and I do not veto speakers. I'm not the program director. That's not what I do here. But if I was the one who had to decide, and if I was the one who had that kind of power, I would not invite someone to speak from the pulpit against same-sex marriage for a couple of reasons. First of all, the appeal to tradition is absolutely worthless because there's all sorts of things that are traditional that we now view as evil. You know, women didn't vote when this country was formed. That's traditional. In some sense, polygamy is traditional. If you go back to the book of Genesis, men had multiple wives, and that's in the Bible. So is slavery. Let's reinstitute slavery. That's traditional. So, no, the appeal to tradition is irrelevant. Poor Bill's losing it. And the other thing is, we are a congregation that has made a point of accepting, without reservation, the LGTB or BT, the acronym keeps changing, community. Lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgenders are welcome here. We are not going to give them a secondary status by saying, well, you can't get married. That's not going to happen. I don't care how open-minded we want to claim to be. The pulpit's not open to that in this church. That's how I feel. And if someone really wanted to push that from the pulpit, I would oppose it in the strongest possible way. That's not who we are. Other people can have that discussion, not on Sunday morning, not here, not when members of our congregation are then going to be attacked and told, you're not equal, separate but equal. We'll give you something else. You know, we'll call it something else, but we can't call it marriage. I'm not interested in that. Doug's opinion is that we don't do that here. Finally, how about abortion? This one's even tougher. Could you not be a religious liberal and still think, you know, there's a lot we don't understand about life, about what it is to be human. Maybe we shouldn't be having abortions because we don't really know what's going on. We don't know if there's a soul involved or not. There's a lot of things we don't know. Why don't we err on the side of caution and not permit abortion in this country? Now, that is not my view. But I can understand how you could be religiously liberal and hold that view. And indeed some do, but you don't hear that voice within Unitarian Universalism. If you are opposed to abortion, you're probably not willing to speak out because you know you're a small minority in this group and you would be very hesitant. You wouldn't know how you'd be received, and a lot of people would get very irate at you for saying that. But you can be religiously liberal and have that conviction. And indeed, if someone wanted to speak from the pulpit, not to condemn people who've had abortions, not to quote Bible verses, but to have a adult, mature, philosophical discussion on what life is and what the implications of abortions are, both for the woman who has them, for the, whether you call it an unborn child or a fetus, and have that discussion within the confines of our congregation, I think we could do that. And there would be, if it's done right, it would not be threatening to people, and it does fit in very well with the mission of our congregation. It doesn't happen very much in Unitarian Universalist churches, though. Very little. I've never heard of it. It may have. But that would be a challenge for you congregation. But I think it's one that we should be willing to embrace. Not that I have anyone in mind, but I'm just saying to challenge this perception that being a religious liberal is the same as being a political liberal. So there's a lot more that's going to come out about this throughout the year in my sermons as we wrestle with what it is to be who we are. And I've gone on at great length, so I'm going to wind it up now. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. 2016 looks to be a promising year, and I'm excited about the sermons that are going to be coming up.